Hello, my name's Ben,
And my name's Josh.
and welcome back to FPL Graduates. Welcome back to another video. It is the penultimate game week of the season. Game week 37 is coming up just around the corner now. The season has gone very, very quickly. Without further ado, let's jump into mine and Josh's teams, have a look at our team selections, and have a look at some of the final decisions that we're going to be making in our FPL teams.
Okay then, so yeah, getting into my team for Game Week 37, we're off the back of a 4k green arrow up to 35k in the world, which if you would have told me that pre-Game Week 36, I would have taken it because I didn't really have any great differentials that I felt confident in this week. Obviously, with the Marmouche leak, I brought in Mateus Cunha, which actually -6 points, because if I left Marmouche in there, Rogers would have came off the bench, I think. So yeah, it's not ideal, but obviously I think Cunha for me is a decent pick for the end of the season. In hindsight, I wish I moved to Ollie Watkins a week early, but obviously that's after knowing he scored a goal against Bournemouth. So getting into this week, I've got one free transfer again. Decision for transfer is not yet to be made, but I've got a few options that I'll go through at the end of my team selection. In defence this week, we've got Emi Martinez. Obviously, Villa off the back of 2 clean sheets. They need to put the lottery on because that never happens. So yeah, more than happy with him at the moment. He's picked up, I think, 5 bonus points, I think, or 4 bonus points and a save point actually in his last 2. So yeah, really happy with him in goal. Obviously, I've got Kiwior to start the defence. I'm very tempted to start Conor Bradley over him, just because I just don't feel like Arsenal were keeping a clean sheet there. Obviously them getting a point at Anfield puts top 5 pretty much within doubt in terms of their position. So yeah, I feel like Newcastle obviously need to go there and get some points, and I think they'll score goals. They've been very good going forwards, and Eddie Howe's been playing some decent tactics like we saw against Chelsea. So yeah, tempted by Bradley in for him. Joko Vardiol is an interesting one because obviously they've got the FA Cup final on Saturday and the game is on Tuesday, but the deadline's on Friday. So hopefully he's fine, and that goes for all Palace and City assets, that they can pull through the final when there's no injuries and things like that, because that will just be frustrating. But yeah, Daniel Munoz probably could have left White Hart Lane or Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with 20 plus points by the sounds of things and by watching the highlights, but we'll take the 11 points last week. What's the thoughts on that defence, Ben, and then that sort of conundrum between Arsenal defence and then Conor Bradley?
Yeah, so in terms of your defence, fairly solid actually. This is now the third time of trying to record this without it booting me off the call. But yeah, like I said, Guardiola, Munoz, and Martinez are all fairly solid picks. The Kiwior pick is an interesting one. I'd honestly sort of steer clear of Liverpool at the moment. They could concede against anyone, and I don't think they care too much about the result. They've been off holidaying and that sort of thing. So I'd probably prefer Kiwior in that sense. Although, like saying that, I probably wouldn't double up on Arsenal either.
Then so into the midfield then. I currently got Brian and Bubo on the captaincy, and I don't think that will change even with my transfer plans, to be honest. The captaincy this week is wide open, so if you have a gut feeling about a player, then I would go for them. The key thing with these Brentford players is that if Crystal Palace win the FA Cup final on Saturday, the game becomes sort of non-important because Brentford won't really be able to get into Europe if that was the case. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the FA Cup final sort of affects performances. Obviously, we can't really do anything because the FA Cup final is post-deadline. So, it's a bit of a weird game week this week where the FA Cup final has quite a big impact on a lot of different teams that, potentially we've got a lot of assets from. So, I'm going with Mbeumo just because I think Brentford will play a strong team no matter what the result is in that FA Cup final. And also, it's a London derby that they're at home at. So, yeah, more than confident with him at the moment, the armband. Obviously, Eberechi Eze is in that FA Cup final. He's off the back of a 16-pointer last week. He's been doing unbelievable. Obviously, a massive 50-50 swing that's gone my way, which is nice in terms of Eze. So, yeah, really happy with him at the moment. Probably will keep him this week and then look to maybe sell next week with the transfer plans that I'll talk about in a moment. Kevin De Bruyne, again, someone who, for me, to be honest, I wouldn't even mind selling this week. It is his final home game at the Etihad, so there is that upside, but I can see an early sub almost certainly, and it's just how many minutes he gets in that FA Cup final as well. I think ideal world, I'd be trying to limit how many players I have from Palace and City, just because of the unknown that will obviously happen in that game prior. Mo Salah's currently on the vice captaincy, but probably won't have it come my transfers, just because Mate, Arnie Slot is in Ocean Beach on Monday, a week before they're playing Brighton. I just don't think there's any sort of motivation from them at all, even with the records at stake and stuff. And yeah, Mo Salah's goal threat in itself has dropped off a cliff in recent weeks. Morgan Rogers is definitely going to start this week for me. Tottenham at home, they played so poorly against Crystal Palace. A lot of fans think that they might play a slightly stronger team than what they did against Palace. But even still, that team's gotten to 17th in the league, so I don't think it's getting them much further. So yeah, that's the midfield at the minute. Ben, what's the thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean the captaincy is interesting definitely this week. There, in my opinion, isn't like that standout option that you can sort of go for and be assured of points. So it's going to be quite a swingy week, I think. Like people will go and Burmo, and I think as it stands, he seems like sort of the most safe option to go for. So yeah, I don't mind the captaincy at all. And like you said, I don't think the FA Cup final is going to have too much bearing on the side that Thomas Frank does put out. He would have decided that prior to the FA Cup final taking place anyway. In terms of your other assets there in there, I think owning Palace assets does hold its own element of risk with that, just because of how far after the deadline the game is being played. And the same with Manchester City players, of course, with De Bruyne. I agree with you. I think that early sort of substitution is going to happen. So yeah, I think there's an element of risk with that. And like you said, the Villa fixture looks to be the one that you sort of look to target the attackers playing for them, because they've got two really good fixtures over the next two in Man United and Spurs. So you don't really get much better than that, which says to me, like a starting Rodgers is going to be a sensible move.
Yeah, and then moving on to the forward line then, and I'll talk about my transfers, or at least proposed transfers this week. We've also got Johan Visser. Same sort of thing applies with him as in Burmo, but more than happy to own him. I had him for a few weeks now, and he's been fairly consistent other than last week. And then Mateus Cunha, who obviously got that 0-pointer. To be honest, I'm quite lucky that he didn't get sent off, because he took the guy down when he was bearing down in goal for the penalty that they conceded. So yeah, a little bit lucky there. A bit unlucky to buy him that week though, but yeah, I'm more than happy to own him, especially against Palace away. If they win the FA Cup, they are not going to be the most brightest Palace team I think we've ever seen. So definitely room for returns there for Mateus Cunha. Obviously, you do have Mateta on the bench. He is potentially part of the transfer plan. So one plan that I had is to move Mateta to Ollie Watkins and sort of make up for my mistake last week of going with Cunha. The only issue I have with that is who do I bench? Because a lot of these players have fairly decent fixtures and are fairly decent assets. I think if on sort of paper right now, it probably would be Kevin De Bruyne, just because I can't see him playing enough minutes for me to be satisfied with starting him. Not only that, City haven't really been firing on all cylinders. He's actually blanked 4 times in his last 3 times in his last 4 games, should I say. So yeah, I've obviously picked him for the captaincy haul, but for me, he's not really performed at that level. The other thing is I could potentially I have looked at moving Salah to Palmer, which would then enable me to move Eze to Saka the week after for Gameweek 38. Obviously, they face Southampton. So I am thinking about that. The only issue with that is that I already don't own Isak, and he's 100% EO. Getting rid of Salah at 100% EO, I'm taking a lot of risk, which I'm not sure if the upside's there, especially with Palmer not having Jackson there. We know historically he's played a lot better with Nicholas Jackson than without. So yeah, I'm a bit on the fence really with my transfer plans at the moment. I could just leave it and go with this team and have 2 free transfers for next week. I'm very much on the fence, but Ollie Watkins and Cole Palmer are probably 2 assets that I do want to have a piece of this week, just because the fixtures are so nice. So yeah, what's the thoughts on the forward line, Ben? And then yeah, those sort of ideas of transfers, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Mateta seems to be an easy transfer out. In my opinion, the minutes aren't secure. Ever since his injury, he's not completed 75 minutes, so we know that he's going to be a minutes risk, especially in a midweek after a FA Cup game. We've seen Nketiah is more than capable of starting games for Crystal Palace, and I do think if there's not a great performance from Mateta on the Saturday, and Nketiah could get his chance. So it's one of those ones that I think he's a minutes risk. So for me, sort of you're either getting rid of him this week or next week, and you just got to decide whether you want to capitalise on 2 fixtures or 1. I think Ollie Watkins is definitely captaincy material as well, which sort of may help further your case. I think if you're sort of looking at other transfers, you're almost sort of in a position where if you do make the transfer this week, because of leaks and that sort of thing, you could end up sort of taking hits on the final day. Having 2 free transfers is going to be quite powerful on the final day as well. So I think the same as you, it's a little bit on the fence, determined on sort of like the strength of your starting lineup for this game week. If you can afford to bench Mateta, maybe it's worth holding off a week. But like I said, there's a potential captaincy standout option there as well. So yeah, in terms of your forward line as well, yeah, not too bad. Of course, the Cunha pick didn't quite come off as a lot of managers were expecting, and not actually that many replacements of Mateta performed really well this game we've just gone. So yeah, it's not too much damage done from that, and hopefully sort of he gets a couple of returns over the next 2. And like you said, Visser, yeah, again, similar situation to Mbeumo. He's going to be a good asset. Hopefully for the last 2 games, you can't guarantee anything, but he has been in great form anyway. Okay, so moving on into my team, and we were off the back of like a really grey/red arrow this game week, and we're sort of trudging along at 67k in the world, which is not too bad at all. Sort of gone from 90k to 60k over the last sort of 5 or 6 game weeks, so been a little bit slow in terms of sort of going through and sort of gaining that top 50k. In terms of my team and how it looks, I mean, since we've done this graphic, I've already changed my starting lineup, so we will go through that. To start off in goal, we've got David Raya in goal, Newcastle at home. It's between him and Kepa, who has Man City away. I feel like I'm gonna go for Raya on this occasion, just given that the Arsenal defence seems to be a little bit better than Bournemouth's, although I don't think there's actually too much in that. And going Kepa against a Man City team that's played in that FA Cup final could be something that is of interest. But for now, it is on Raya. In a defence, we've got Guardiola Munoz, just like Josh. Very much happy with starting both of those in my team this week. And then we've also got Nico Williams against West Ham away. That third defensive spot is a difficult one to decide on for me, because it's between him, Konsa with Tottenham at home, and Timber with Newcastle at home. Now, I don't think I'm going to start Timber because the minutes haven't been there over the last couple of games, and he's not played. So there has been sort of an element of, is he sort of picked up a knock, that sort of thing. So we'll just have to wait and see on press conferences. If he is fit and sort of raring to go, then hopefully he'll start, but you just can't guarantee that. And yeah, with Konsa, you can't guarantee the clean sheet, although it might be worth sensible sort of starting him, just given how bad Tottenham have been going forwards. But for now, it is on Nico Williams, as there's a little bit more attacking threat there. Josh, what's the thoughts there on the defence?
Yeah, I think overall it's fairly solid. Obviously, having Raya allows you to cover the Arsenal defence EO, which is obviously usually relatively high, with most people having Saliba, Timber, Kiwior, at least part of that defence. Nico Williams is an interesting one. Obviously, Forest have been a bit of a letdown the last few weeks. You can definitely see the team fatiguing towards the back end of this season. It's a tough one between him and Konsa, because Villa have defended really well the last couple of weeks, and obviously got clean sheets off the back of both of them. It's just one of those things where we might get a leak for that Tottenham team, and maybe if they go similar to what they went on Sunday last week, you probably maybe start Konsa. But if not, then yeah, Nico Williams is by far not a bad option. Obviously, Forest defensively in recent weeks haven't been great, but they are still a decent defence in my opinion, and especially with Nico Williams' attacking threat on some set pieces as well. I think yeah, the upside's probably with Nico.
Okay, so moving on into the midfield, and again, I think there's been changes since we sort of like put this together. Ismaila Sarr in this was starting, currently on my bench at the moment, because I'm trying to avoid those Crystal Palace and Manchester City players as best I can, just because of the unknown. So at the moment he's on the bench, and Alexander Isak, as you can see, is on my bench. He is starting. So as it currently stands, it is a 3-4-3. It's a good sort of benching dilemma to have, because it's 2 good quality players in terms of FPL assets. I've also got Mbeumo on the captaincy, There isn't anyone standout for me in terms of that captaincy. I think there's a few different options that I could go towards, and there's a couple of really interesting differential shouts that I could look at for the captaincy. One of which is actually Jared Bowen in terms of the captaincy, because he's been in great form over the last 3 weeks, particularly since I've brought him in, which has been fantastic, albeit not been like the double-digit hauls, it's been single returns. But again, can't complain too much about that. So again, starting Jared Bowen, it has me sort of thinking, right, do I look at starting Konza just to maybe sort of double down on West Ham and Jared Bowen scoring? That could be something quite sensible for me to consider going into this game week. We've also got Morgan Rogers. As Josh said, that Villa game against Spurs is going to be sort of really interesting and a good from a Villa attacking perspective, and one that I think, Rogers will be sort of 40% EO, so not too high either. And then to round off the midfield, we've got Salah with Brighton away. Like I said, Liverpool on the beach. Salah is probably not so much on the beach just because he is chasing some records from goal scoring and an assisting perspective as well. So he's going to want to get involved in everything. Josh, what's the thoughts on the midfield? And there's a potential benching dilemma in there too.
Yeah, I think it's the right decision to play Isak. I know Arsenal away on paper is not a great fixture, but Newcastle this season have done well against them. Obviously, they had those 2 legs in the Carabao Cup where they won both pretty convincingly as well. So, yeah, I'd personally start him. They've got much more to play for than Arsenal as well in terms of making sure they get into that top 5. Bowen's an interesting one. Obviously, I think he only had 25 touches against Man United at the weekend, but obviously came away with a goal. Just set up well. Obviously, West Ham played that game to perfection in the way that they set up. I think at home against Forest, he probably won't play up top with Kudus. We've seen sort of Fulkrug come into the team in home games, and then obviously the Kudus and Bowen going a bit wider. But it hasn't really stopped his returns. He's been really consistent. And when you brought him in, I said to you that I'm pretty jealous of that pick because he's just so consistent. Like you say, he doesn't really double-digit haul. I remember last season he got a hat trick, but other than that, like, he's just consistent, which is what you want in FPL. So really like him. And then the rest of it sort of picks itself, and obviously really similar to my team.
Okay, so moving on into the strike force and then the potential transfer / sub plans. We've got Johan Visser and Chris Wood up top. Visser, of course, brought him in last week as part of my -4. Didn't quite pay off, but Wood, who I did bring in on the -4 for Marmouche when we found out he was not starting, was the only striker really that returned this game week. So coming away with a net positive sort of result in terms of points from the 2 transfers is ideal, and definitely one that I'm happy with. And like I said, Isak, as it currently stands, is starting ahead of Ismaila Sarr. There's been a couple of sort of thoughts on transfers, one of which is potentially Isak to Watkins. I'm not sort of like 100% sold on doing that because I do think Isak has potential to return in both games, in Gameweek 37 and 38. And maybe I just have to sort of take the hit and not go with Watkins this week. Maybe start Konza and try and sort of cover some points that way. There's a couple of ideas floating around with me, like whether I sort of bring in Bukayo Saka. But for me, I think the sensible thing to do, given my position, given the strength that I've got in my team, particularly on the bench at the moment, is to potentially roll that free transfer and really attack the Game Week 38 fixtures. The Game Week 37 fixtures are not bad, but Game Week 38 is the one where we can truly attack that game week. And I do think, regardless of what happens this week in terms of my transfer plans, I will be making 2 free transfers next week anyway. So I'm saving myself almost a hit next week by rolling my free transfer. And if I wanted to make a transfer this week, again, I'd be really tempted to take the -4. So I'm saving myself hopefully 8 points by not taking the hits and saving my free transfer going into next game week. So yeah, that's the sort of thought process and thinking behind it. Josh, what's the overall thoughts?
Yeah, Chris Wood obviously ever reliable this season. So always good and always amongst the bonus points when he does score as well. I think it's a logical process in terms of maybe sticking to your guns and not going gung ho this week and being able to really sort of attack those fixtures and usually we get quite a lot of team news when it comes to Game Week 38 because obviously everyone's playing at the same time. So yeah, it could be a nice strategy. Obviously, like you say, it saves you points as well. You've just got to hope that the likes of Watkins, maybe a Palmer as well, they don't go too nuclear this week against, let's be honest, rotated and poor opposition. Okay then, so that wraps up our Game Week 37 team reveals, the penultimate game week of the season. Only one more to go. Let us know how you're doing in your mini leagues, how many points maybe you're away or clear of those rivals.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the FPL Graduates. I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
We'll see you guys
next time. Have a good game week, everyone.
But I'm not going down with you.